Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Michigan friends and family. This is the Convention of States Michigan podcast. If you are turning in for the first time, my name is Robin Riddell. I am the State Communications Coordinator for Convention of States here in Michigan. And we're working within our great state to become part of the National Convention of States. As part of this, each state is passing a resolution to hold a national convention of the states to propose amendments to the Constitution. I'm joined today by my co-host, Kelly Oldford, and our guest, Deanna Becket. And we're going to walk through what a convention of state process looks like. Welcome to you both.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me on again. Once again, my name is Kelly Olford. I am a volunteer and I'm a district captain here with Convention of States in Michigan. I live in St. Clair and kind of in the southern part of the thumb there with my husband, a couple of kids, and I've been volunteering with Convention of States for a little over 2 years now, close to 2.5 years maybe now at this point. Do a lot of communication stuff. I work with Robin a lot. I work as a district captain, do lots of different stuff within kind of my St. Clair neighborhood, right in my backyard, right in my community. So it's great to be able to work with all of the kind of local, the local community, local neighborhoods as well, and work with all of the kind of Michigan electorate too. So thanks for having me on, Robin, and thanks for joining us, Deanna.
All right, well, let's move ahead and let's meet Deanna. Deanna Becket works at the national level with several states around Michigan. She is the assistant regional manager for the Wild West region. I chuckle when I read that. I just don't know how Michigan is the Wild West, but I'll take it that we belong somewhere. Deanna, thanks for taking a few minutes today out of your busy schedule. Tell us a little bit about how long you've been with Convention of States and what prompted your initial involvement.
Certainly, it's a blessing to be here. It's great. Little basics about me. I've been married 26 years. We homeschooled our 2 children. They are both now graduated and successfully holding jobs that have benefits. So that's a great thing as a homeschool mom to go, yes, they're gainfully employed. I'm actually a published author and my cover designer is from Michigan. So that's kind of a connection there. And I started volunteering with Convention of States almost 8 years ago in South Dakota. And what drew me to it was, of course, the answer that we have. That's a peaceful answer to push back against what is just coming down like a lead balloon and a heavy weight. But now, and I did the district captain position as well. I was asked to do the regional captain position, but I had been looking for a full-time work position, and I had to turn the regional captain position down. But I did handle 2 or 3 different districts, and we have gone. This will be my 8th season legislative session in South Dakota. So it's been a battle, but we keep coming back and fighting. But now I am the associate regional director with David Schneider in the Wild West region, and I support your state plus 5 other states with their grassroots leaders. And it's great to work with you all and be that connection between the national jumps that we have to go through, all of the paperwork and things like that, and then get things rolling like for fairs and events.
Just quickly, what other states do you work with besides Michigan?
Certainly. And I think this is what defines the Wild West. It's Montana, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and then Michigan. There was some trading of states a while back, so that's probably the answer.
Well, Deanna, as someone who works on the national team, we invited you to here today to discuss a national type topic. We would like you to walk us through and tell our Michigan audience on how a convention of states will operate. First, regarding the phase of the process we're in right now at the national level, what is the first step for us to hold a convention of states?
Certainly. And I don't know if it's even a national type topic. It comes from, being grassroots and being the volunteers. We're very well educated on the process. And it's just a matter of learning how to communicate that to everyone around us and our legislators. But the basics is every state submits an application to their House and Senate to be approved by both houses. And the key is developing relationships. We need their support. We need their sponsorship in the committees. And of course, for their vote out on the floor. And we need 34 states to be able to call a convention. And if we go back to Article 5 in the Constitution, and that's easy to find in our handy dandy pocket guide.
Nice.
The first part is the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, comma, and this is where Convention of States come in. Or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. So we're at 19 states right now that have passed this resolution in their legislature, and we need to get to 34.
Very good. So, and I, by the way, I liked your point that you said right at the very beginning that for those of us who do volunteer, who are active within Convention of States, we know this process probably in our heads, and we've read Article 5 like you just read for us. We know all of that, but I love what you said about kind of training up ourselves and learning how to communicate it. I love that you brought that point up. Just being able to know it well enough and be able to actually talk about it and have a conversation about it, because that's the kind of the biggest, what I've seen is kind of the biggest stumbling block for most people is that you say, well, we're going to have a convention of states. Well, what does that mean? So just being able to actually sit and have a normal conversation about something like that can be a real hurdle for people. So I appreciate that you said that. So kind of moving on to the next step here, when we get to that requisite number, that 34 states, when we get to that number to actually hold a convention, what comes next?
What comes next? Basically, Congress determines the time and place. And Article 5 that I just read determines or states that Congress shall call the convention. There is no maybe or Congress will pull it into Congress. It's Congress shall call the convention. They set the time, the date, and the location. That's it. And thankfully, those closest to us, our own state legislators, will be able to choose the delegates, or they're called commissioners, and they will set the rules, not Congress. That's the next step.
So they set the rules for the actual convention?
The delegates from our states, and that is all determined by our own state legislators.
Could you maybe talk us through, or if you know, like when you're saying that our state legislatures get to choose the delegates, what does that look like?
Well, we have to look back in historical precedents, or what it looked like in the past, and it was basically our state legislators. So let's say you've got your district state legislator that says, I want. They go into a vote. All of that legalese I'm not familiar with extremely. But they will meet just like they do at the beginning of their state legislatures, and they will set the rules, typically, Robert's Rules of Order, things like that. But before it's even called and they send people, they have to decide who they're going to send. So they could send themselves, they could send, they could send all of their state legislators. But typically, and we'll get to this in a little bit, but typically, that group of legislators is only going to get one vote. It's not going to be set up like we currently have it.
So let me just clarify something, because I've had people say this. Well, what if the president objects? What if the governor of Michigan objects? What do you say to that?
They're not part of the process. It's laid out in. It's interesting. It's the shortest article in the Constitution. It's just little, and it's the states. it brings the power back to us, we the people.
So let me ask. So now we have all the people, the date and time is set, and we're all ready to go. Everybody gathers together at the place determined by Congress. What happens on day one of the actual convention?
Day one of the convention. In this day and age, of course, it's going to be a media flurry.
Yeah.
And everything's going to be broadcast, and it's going to be like a Super Bowl of anything we've ever seen. That's what Mark Meckler, our founder, says. But it's going to be laying out the rules and the regulations. I wasn't able to attend the first simulation that we did, but it would be, and that's on the website under simulation if you search for that, and you can watch how they rolled everything through. But it's going to be the gathering, just like your state legislatures, getting to know people, getting things laid out, getting the rules laid out, and working through all of those processes.
What's the simulation that you were just talking about?
The simulation is, I believe it was 2016, if I remember right, and they rolled through with real state legislators. They invited them, and they all gathered in Colonial Williamsburg and led a simulated convention of states. And I believe it was a couple of days long, but it's all recorded and on our website.
So Convention of States actually led the simulation?
Correct.
Would our National Convention of States project, this organization that we all volunteer for, would they have any role at an actual convention?
Not necessarily. It would just be guiding the grassroots to be in continual communication with their legislators. But this will all be run by the state legislature, the state delegates that are chosen by the legislators.
Deanna, how long do you think this convention of states would last? A day, 2, 6? What do you think?
It's hard to tell. I mean, goodness, how long does Congress meet? A year long? It really all depends on, what's there, what's discussed, how they break up the committees to discuss each topic that they can develop. So it's in our classic words of our legal department, it depends.
My favorite response. So what are the delegates doing during this time?
During the convention?
Mm-hmm.
During the convention, I think they would be meeting with each other, gathering, the framing of the amendments that they want to bring and how that needs to be worded. Just the basics. Yeah, without watching the simulation, it's hard to even guess what their processes would be.
Do you have any major takeaways from the simulation that you would want to share with us?
I
have not watched it in its entirety, so I do not know.
We'll let our audience watch it in entirety, and they can come back with their questions. We'll take it from there. So
we should put that on the resources page.
Oh,
good the link available on the resources page.
Remind me of that, and I'll do that. So, Deanna, once these amendment proposals are put together by the convention, what happens? It's not the law of the land, is it?
The proposals for amendments are going to need to be voted out of convention. So if you think of Convention of States, we think of it, of course, relationships with our legislators, building the grassroots to continue to educate everyone. But it's truly mathematical when you come down to the convention. The math to remember is 2/3, 1/2, and 3/4. And if you're like me, you sucked at fractions. So you just trust the system. But in the Constitution, it says 2/3 of Congress or 2/3 of the states will call a convention. That's how we can call the meeting to propose amendments. Then whatever is gathered, written, discussed, agreed upon, it has to pass 1/2, 51% to get out of convention to go back to the states. And then, probably jumping ahead of the conversation that we have, once that goes back to the states, then it becomes a 3/4, which is in the Constitution. 3/4 of the states need to agree to ratify anything to become law of the land.
Sounds like an arduous process. In other words, this isn't going to happen overnight.
Oh, no, I don't think it would happen even in a year.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. And that's why we focus on the mission of Convention of States as building the largest grassroots army. Because, and people ask, well, we've passed the state. Why do we still need to continue to educate and, build our state? I said, well, when we get to call the convention and then it gets out of convention, then it comes back to the states for ratification. That could be 10 years. We've got new legislators that may not have a clue what's going on, haven't been educated. And our army still needs to continue to educate these people so that when it comes back for ratification, we can be on the front lines, back in those committee rooms, back on the floor, and back in our state house and Senate.
It's a really interesting point that the mission of Convention of States doesn't stop when we actually get to hold a convention, that we still have work to do even after that yet.
I think the work will probably triple. And that might be a small fraction.
Wow.
So how many states do we need then? You said 3/4 of the states to then ratify any any proposed amendments. How many states is that?
Oh, you would make me math in public, wouldn't you? No, I've got those numbers memorized, of course. So way back when they created these, of course, they only had 13 states. So it was pretty simple math. But 2/3 of the states is going to be 34 states. And then they need 26 states to vote it out of convention. And then 3/4 of the states is going to be 38 states.
Okay. So ultimately 38 states need to pass it or need to ratify the amendment proposals.
Correct.
Okay. And any idea what that process looks like? Is it something similar to what we're seeing now with state legislatures passing that resolution?
Well, considering probably none of us were around for any other ratification, but they may have had something ratified within our lifetimes, but obviously we weren't around to remember it. We'd have to look it up and read it. But the process is arduous, and I believe it's similar to what we're going with now. We've got to go through every little step.
No magic wand here. We've got to do the work, and it's up to the grassroots.
It is.
To make it happen. This is an opportunity for we, the people, to play a role in the government as it was designed for us. Would you agree?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Any last words? Did we overlook anything?
I like your thought, Robin, on us having that honor of a lifetime of being able to take an active role in our government. It's pretty cool.
And I found it interesting that we mentioned the numbers and the 38 states, and we have to pass. If we think 38 states is a high bar, take that times 2, -1 for Nebraska because they're unicameral. They just have one body. But 76 bodies of legislators. I mean, times, how many hundreds of legislators to become law. I mean, that's a huge bar because one body in one state can completely cancel it all. So it's a high bar, and it's continual education that we need to be giving to our grassroots, but also continue to be, in our legislators' lives, and continue and encouraging some of us to run for these offices as well. Mm-hmm. And it was intentionally set by our founders so that we wouldn't have a runaway process.
And Deanna, for the benefit of our listeners, in case they haven't listened to an earlier podcast, which we have available for them, would you just quickly review what the 3 points of this resolution? What are the areas we're tackling?
Certainly. The 3 topics, we call them our 3 pillars, and I shorten it for when I'm doing fairs or talking to people. We want to limit their time, power, and money. That's it. So we want to propose term limits. We want to limit their spending, and we also want to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. That's in a nutshell. Obviously, we've got it written out in specific, but those are the
Sure.
three. And I love it. It's limiting their time, power, and money.
I like that the way you wrapped it around into 3 pillars. I'm going to use that again because I'm always groping for a word on what to call those. But I'm sure all of you would. I've had the question. I remember telling a family member about this thing. It's like, what, are you guys going to come and take away our guns? Let me repeat the 3 pillars for example, and it's focus. That won't vary. It can't vary. Am I correct?
Correct. Because if that comes up, it will be called out of order. And if you think about it, if something would actually come out, take 50 minus 38. Now we're mathing in public. Now we've got a real challenge. So what do we got? 50 minus 38. We got 12, right? It takes 13 states to stop anything out of control. Well, I can probably count really fast 13 states that support even the Second Amendment. Anything radical, it takes 13 states to stop it. And that's going to be pretty easy to count.
Kelly, any last questions?
I do have one quick question that I'd like to get your thoughts on, Deanna. You've mentioned a few times about obviously wanting to continue to educate ourselves and continue to educate the grassroots. Is there anything specific that you would recommend, or anything that you've done personally, any books you've read, anything you've studied, anything on the COS, Convention of States website? Is there anything that you would recommend for us to be able to continue to educate ourselves?
Certainly. And of course, I have my books covered up. But Tom Coburn, one of our past senior advisors, wrote a book called Smashing the DC Monopoly. And then, of course, the other one written by amazing scholar, he's Professor Robert Nadelson, and he wrote The Law of Article 5. The Law of Article B is where you find it. But even just Robert Nadelson's website, I would definitely recommend going to. And that, let's see if I can remember it right now, articlevinfocenter.com. And I'm going to double check that before I.
He runs a like some
articlevinfocenter.com. Yep, there it is.
And maybe that's
Well
it.
done.
Doesn't he run like some sort? It's like not a think tank, but some sort of like an Article 5 organization as
Exactly.
well.
Yep,
Okay.
constantly educating, and he was a professor in many different places, but his resume is long, and he's very well versed. And I believe I'm not going to say, because I might be guessing. I was thinking he was an attorney, but I believe he's a professor. But he taught many constitutional classes.
Well, thank you for that ton of information. Thank you for Deanna for walking us through all of those steps and just the actual process of everything, and walking us through all of that, and for joining us today. So that was some great clarification and education for all of us here in our Michigan audience.
Absolutely.
And Deanna, I also want to thank you for joining us. I will let the audience know this is the first time we've seen you in person, but we sure communicate back and forth, and we appreciate everything you do to help support us here in Michigan. And to our Michigan friends, as you heard today, you can clearly see that our national team leadership has thought through this Convention of States and every other issue. There is a solid direction for the Convention of States project moving forward. There's hope. You can rest assured that a Convention of States to propose amendments would be safe, effective, and efficient. There is legal and historical precedent for everything we are doing, and Article 5 Convention is truly the way to protect our republic for future generations. To those of you who are listening, if you haven't signed the petition, please do so. The information here on the podcast, or you can find it on the Convention of States website. When you sign that petition, you're letting the Michigan legislators know that you support Convention of States. And if you want to do more, become a volunteer. Whether you have a few minutes or a few hours a week, we have roles that fit everyone's personality and time commitments. You can find out everything at our website at conventionofstates.com/Michigan. And when or if you have questions about something you heard here today or another podcast, or maybe you would like to have our team come and visit your town, send us an email at askmi@cosaction.com. Deanna and Kelly, thank you both for joining us today and for everything you do every single day to help this great country. And to all Michiganders, stay with the fight.